Cordelia Ashford clutched her wedding dress to her chest as she slipped through the barn doors, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Behind her, the sounds of celebration echoed from the main house fiddle. Music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses raised in honor of a union she refused to accept. In 3 hours, she was supposed to marry Barnabas Grimwald, a man twice her age whose hands lingered too long and whose breath reeked of whiskey and cruelty. Not today, she whispered to herself, bunching up her skirts as she ran toward the tree line. The Arizona Territory stretched before her in the moonlight, wild and unforgiving, but no more dangerous than the life awaiting her as Grimwald's wife. She had made it perhaps a mile when the Apache warrior appeared. He materialized. From the shadows like smoke given form, his bronzed skin gleaming in the pale light, obsidian hair falling past his shoulders. Cordelia stumbled backward, her wedding dress catching on thorns as she tried to flee. But he moved with the fluid grace of a mountain cat, blocking her path. Without seeming to hurry, running from something, white woman? His English was accented but clear, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel both terrified and strangely seen. "Please," she gasped, "I just need to get away. From here, I won't cause trouble." The warrior, tall and lean with war paint still streaking his cheekbones, tilted his head. "Trouble follows you already. The men from your settlement, they come soon." As if summoned by his words, distant shouts echoed through the night. Grimwald's voice rose above the others, ugly with rage and possession. "They want their property back," Cordelia said bitterly, then looked up at the Apache with desperate hope. "You could kill me. It would be a mercy." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps even respect. "I am Kestai of the Chiricahua. We do not kill those who run toward freedom." He studied her torn dress, her bleeding feet, her wild hair. "But your people will catch you before dawn." "Then I'll run farther. Into Apache territory?" "You would die before the sun climbs high." The sounds of pursuit grew closer. Horses now, and dogs. Cordelia closed her eyes, feeling the walls of her fate closing in around her. When she opened them, Kestai was watching her with an unreadable expression. "There is another way," he said slowly, "but you would have to trust me. I don't even know you." "No, but you know what waits behind you." He extended his hand, calloused from years of warfare and survival. "Choose." Cordelia looked back toward the approaching torches, then at this stranger who offered her something she had never truly possessed. A choice. Without another word, she placed her hand in his. Kestai pulled her close, and in one swift motion lifted her onto his painted horse. As they disappeared into the desert night, Cordelia heard Grimwald's furious roars fade behind them, swallowed by the vast wilderness that would either kill her or set her free. The Apache camp appeared at dawn like a mirage made real, rising from the red earth in the shadow of towering mesas. Cordelia had dozed fitfully against Kesta's chest during the long ride, her exhaustion finally overcoming her fear. Now, fully awake, she stared at the collection of wickiups and brush shelters with growing apprehension. "Your people will not welcome me," she said as Kestai helped her down from his horse. Her wedding dress was in tatters, stained with dust and blood from thorns. "My people welcome strength," he replied, his dark eyes assessing her. "Show them you have it." The Apache emerged from their dwellings like ghosts materializing in the morning light. Men with faces marked by sun and warfare, women whose eyes held the sharp intelligence of survivors, children who stared at her white skin with open curiosity. An elderly woman with silver-streaked hair and a face like weathered leather stepped forward. "Grandmother Nalani," Kestai said respectfully. "I bring a refugee from the white settlement." Nalani's gaze swept over Cordelia with the thoroughness of a hawk studying prey. "She runs from her own people wearing their ceremonial garments. Why should we shelter one who may bring soldiers to our door? Because she chose freedom over safety, Kestai answered. As our ancestors did when they first saw these mountains. The old woman circled Cordelia slowly, taking in her bleeding hands, her determined stance despite obvious exhaustion. Can you work, white girl? I can learn. Can you endure hardship without weeping for your mother's house? Cordelia thought of the bruises Grimwold had already left on her arms during their brief courtship, of the cattle pen existence that awaited women in her settlement. I've endured worse than hardship. I've endured hopelessness. Nalani's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. We shall see, she turned to Kestai. She is your responsibility. If she brings trouble, it falls on your head. Understood? Grandmother. The next days blurred together in a haze of learning and adaptation. Cordelia discovered muscles she never knew she possessed as she helped the women gather wild plants, process hides, and tend the fires. Her hands, once soft from a life of limited domesticity, grew calloused and strong. The Apache women, initially suspicious, began to show her the desert's secrets, which cacti held water, which roots could heal wounds, which paths were safe, and which led to death. Kestai appeared at unexpected moments, teaching her to read the wind patterns, to move silently through brush, to understand the language of birds that warned of danger. Their conversations were sparse but significant, layered with meanings neither quite dared to voice. Why did you help me? She asked one evening as they sat by the cooking fire, the desert painted amber by the dying sun. Why did you run? He countered. Because the alternative was a kind of death. He nodded slowly. Then we understand each other. But understanding, Cordelia was learning, was not the same as belonging. She caught the worried glances between the elders, heard the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Her presence was a risk they could not afford indefinitely. The morning scouts confirmed her fears. Riders from the settlement, accompanied by territorial soldiers, were systematically searching every canyon and water source within a 2-day ride. They carried descriptions of her and promises of reward money that would tempt even friendly tribes to betrayal. They will find us, Nalani said grimly at the council fire. The white girl must go. Kestai stood abruptly. Where? Back to forced marriage? Into the desert to die? That is not our concern, replied Javik, a scarred warrior whose hatred of whites ran deeper than the arroyos carved by flash floods. Children's safety comes first. As the debate raged around the fire, Cordelia felt the familiar walls closing in again. But this time, she was not the same frightened girl who had fled her wedding. The desert had begun to change her, and with that change came a dangerous new possibility, one that would challenge everything both cultures believed about love, loyalty, and the price of freedom. The attack came 3 days later, swift and brutal. As a flash flood, Cordelia was gathering medicinal plants with Ayana, one of the younger Apache women, when the first shots rang out across the desert. Soldiers in blue uniforms poured over the ridge like a plague of locusts, their rifles glinting in the harsh afternoon sun. Behind them rode Barnabas Grimwold, his face twisted with righteous fury and wounded pride. Cordelia. His voice boomed across the canyon. Come out now, and I'll spare these savages. She pressed herself against the red stone outcropping, her heart racing. Through a gap in the rocks, she could see the Apache camp below, warriors taking defensive positions, women and children scattering toward hidden caves they had prepared for exactly this scenario. We have to help them, she whispered to Ayana. But the Apache woman shook her head. Testa's orders. Keep you safe, away from the fighting. As if summoned by his name, Kestai appeared beside them, moving with that unnerving silence she was learning to recognize. War paint streaked his cheeks, and his bow was already strung, arrows within easy reach. The soldiers have us outnumbered. 3-1, he said grimly. But they don't know the canyon. We can hold them until nightfall, then escape through the hidden passes. Unless they have what they came for, Cordelia said quietly. His dark eyes found hers, and she saw her own. Understanding reflected there. The soldiers would keep coming, keep hunting, as long as she remained with the Apache. Her freedom had become their prison. No, he said firmly. There has to be another way. Look around, Kestai. Your people are dying because of me. Below them, young Nakai cried out as a soldier's bullet found its mark. He fell behind a boulder, clutching his shoulder as his blood stained the desert sand. The sight sent rage coursing through Cordelia's veins. These people had shown her more kindness in days than her own community had in years. I won't let them suffer for my choices, she declared, starting to rise. Kestai caught her arm, his grip firm but not painful. And I won't let you throw away your life for a man who sees you as property. Then what do you suggest? For a moment, the warrior's composed facade cracked, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath. Among my people, when two lives become intertwined by fate and choice, there is a ceremony, a bonding that makes them one in the eyes of the spirits. Cordelia stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You're talking about marriage. Not your people's version ownership and submission, our way. Partnership, equality. His hand touched her face with surprising gentleness. If you were my wife by Apache law, Grimwald's claim would be meaningless. You would belong to yourself, but be protected by our customs. The sound of gunfire continued below, punctuated by war cries and the whinnying of frightened horses. Time was running out, and Cordelia could feel the weight of decision pressing down on her like a physical force. You barely know me, she said. I know you chose freedom over security. I know you've learned to see the desert's beauty instead of only its dangers. I know you grieve when our people are hurt. His eyes never left hers. I know that in 3 days you've become more real to me than anything in my life. Before she could respond, Grandmother Nalani appeared as if conjured by the desert wind. Despite the battle raging below, the old woman's face was calm, though. Her eyes held ancient wisdom and immediate understanding. The bonding ceremony, she said simply, it could work. But it must be real, child, she told Cordelia, not a pretense. The spirits see truth, and a false bond would bring misfortune on us all. Cordelia looked from Nalani to Kestai, this warrior, who had risked everything to save a stranger, who offered her not just protection but genuine partnership. In her chest, something unfamiliar stirred, not the desperate gratitude she had expected, but something deeper and more dangerous. If we do this, she said carefully, I need to know it's not just to save your people or to spite Grimwald. I need to know there's something real between us. Kesta's answer came not in words but in the way he looked at her, as if she were a sunrise he had never expected to see, as if she were both question and answer to something he hadn't known he was seeking. Then let us find out together, he said as Nalani began gathering the sacred items needed for an emergency ceremony. Cordelia realized she was about to embark on her second escape in less than a week, this time not from something, but toward it. The Apache bonding ceremony took place in a hidden cave high above the battle, lit only by sacred fire and the determination of two souls choosing their own destiny. Grandmother Nalani had gathered the necessary elements with remarkable speed sage for cleansing, turquoise stones for protection, and corn pollen blessed by generations of Apache shamans. This is not our usual way, Nalani warned as she painted. Symbolic marks on Cordelia's forehead with red clay. Ceremonies should take days, with families present and proper preparations. But the spirits understand necessity, and they honor courage above convention. Below them, the sound of gunfire had diminished to occasional shots. Kesta's warriors were master tacticians, using the canyon's natural defenses to hold the soldiers at bay while appearing to be a larger force than they actually were. But even Apache cunning could only delay the inevitable for so long. "Are you certain?" Kestai asked Cordelia one final time. He knelt beside her in the firelight, his war paint smeared with sweat and dust, looking every inch the fierce warrior of white settlers' nightmares. Yet his hands were gentle as he touched her face. "Once we speak the binding words, there is no undoing them. You would be Apache, and I would be responsible for your happiness until the stars fall from the sky." Cordelia thought of the life she was abandoning, not just Grimwald's brutality, but the entire world of her birth. No more Sunday sermons or community socials, no more familiar foods or the comfort of shared language and customs. She was choosing exile from everything she had ever known. But as she looked into Kesta's eyes, she realized she had already been in exile, trapped in a life that had no room for her true self. Here, in this cave lit by sacred flames, she felt more at home than she ever had in her father's house or her intended husband's parlor. "I'm certain," she said. "Nalan," began the ancient words, spoken in a mixture of Apache and Spanish that seemed to make the very air shimmer with power. She bound Cordelia and Kesta's hands together with braided sweetgrass, then had them drink from the same gourd of blessed water drawn from a sacred spring. "Speak your truth to each other," the old woman commanded. "Let the spirits hear your intentions." Kestai went first, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "I take you not as possession but as partner. I promise to honor your strength, protect your freedom, and walk beside you through whatever storms the future brings. Your heart will be safe with me, and your dreams will find space to grow in our life together." Cordelia felt tears she hadn't expected prick her eyes. No one had ever promised to protect her freedom before, only her virtue, her reputation, her physical safety. The difference was profound. "I choose you not from desperation but from recognition," she said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "I see in you the possibility of love without ownership, protection without control. I promise to learn your ways and honor your people, to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me, and to stand with you against whatever comes." Nalani sprinkled corn pollen over their joined hands. "By fire and water, by earth and sky, by the ancestors who watch and the unborn who wait, you are bound. What the spirits have joined, let no human force divide." The moment the words were spoken, a strange calm settled over the cave. Outside, the gunfire had stopped entirely. In its place came Grimwald's voice, amplified by the canyon walls. "Cordelia, I know you're up there. Come down now, and we can put this unfortunate episode behind us. I'm prepared to be merciful." Kesta's jaw tightened, but Cordelia placed a steady hand on his arm. "Let me answer him," she said. "As your wife, I have the right to speak for myself." She moved to the cave entrance, where she could be seen but remained protected by the rocky overhang. In the fading daylight, she could see Grimwald mounted among the soldiers, his face red with exertion and wounded pride. "Barnabas Grimwald," she called down, her voice carrying clearly across the canyon. "I am Cordelia, wife of Kestai of the Chiricahua Apache, bound by sacred ceremony and witnessed by the spirits themselves. I renounce all claim you think you have on me. I am not your property, and I never was." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Grimwald's bellow of rage echoed off the stone walls like the roar of a wounded beast. "You think some heathen ritual makes you safe from civilized law? I'll burn this entire canyon to get you back." "Then you'll be burning the wife of an Apache warrior," Kestai called out, appearing beside Cordelia with fluid grace. "And that means war with our entire nation. Are you prepared for that consequence, white man?" The threat hung in the air like smoke from the sacred fire. Everyone present, soldiers and Apache alike, understood the implications. A direct attack on a bonded Apache woman would trigger retribution that would spread across the entire territory. Colonel Hayes, the military leader, could be heard arguing with Grimold in heated whispers. Finally, the colonel called out, "We want no war with the Apache over one white woman. But we cannot simply leave her here against her will." "She is not here against her will." Nalani's ancient voice carried surprising strength across the canyon. "She is here by sacred choice, protected by ancient law. Would you violate the marriage customs of her new people?" As night fell and the implications of the ceremony became clear to all parties, Cordelia realized they had won more than just her freedom. They had created a new possibility, a bridge between worlds that might allow others to choose love over convention, understanding over hatred. But first, they had to survive the consequences of their courage. The standoff lasted 3 days, during which the most unlikely negotiations in Arizona Territory history took place across a canyon filled with tension and the whispered hopes of two peoples learning to see each other as human. Colonel Hayes proved to be more reasonable than anyone had expected. A career soldier who had seen too much bloodshed over misunderstandings, he was willing to acknowledge the legal complexity of Cordelia's situation. Apache marriage customs were recognized by territorial law in certain circumstances, especially when they prevented larger conflicts. Barnabas Grimold was less amenable to reason. "She's been bewitched," he raged at anyone who would listen. No Christian woman would willingly debase herself with savages unless she'd been put under some kind of spell. His inability to conceive that Cordelia might have chosen her fate freely revealed more about his character than all his previous cruelties combined. Even some of the soldiers began to view him with disgust, particularly after Corporal Martinez, whose mother had been Mexican. Apache quietly shared what he knew about the respect Apache men showed their wives. During the negotiations, Cordelia and Kestai had precious little time alone together to contemplate what they had done. The ceremony had been performed in desperate circumstances, but now they faced the daily reality of being married to someone they barely knew. "Do you regret it?" Kestai asked on the second evening as they sat outside the cave watching stars appear over the desert. "No," Cordelia answered without hesitation. "But I'm frightened." "Of me?" "Of disappointing you. Of not being able to become the Apache wife your people need me to be." She wrapped her arms around her knees, suddenly looking very young. "I don't know your customs, your language, your ways of thinking about the world. What if I fail?" Kestai was quiet for a long moment, studying her profile in the starlight. "When I was a boy, my grandfather told me that the strongest partnerships are built not on what people already know about each other, but on their willingness to keep learning. You've already shown more courage than most warriors I know." Courage, born of desperation. All courage begins with necessity, but it becomes something greater through choice. He reached for her hand, still surprised by how naturally their fingers intertwined. "I married you to save you from Grimold, yes. But I chose you because of who you showed yourself to be in those first days among us. You saw us as people, not threats. You worked without complaint. You grieved our wounded as if they were your own family." Cordelia turned to face him fully. "And I chose you because you offered me partnership instead of ownership. Because you spoke to me as if my thoughts mattered. Because you made me feel seen." She paused, then added with a shy smile, "And because you're rather magnificent to look at, which doesn't hurt." Kesta's surprised laughter echoed off the canyon walls, drawing smiles from the sentries posted nearby. It was the first genuinely joyful sound any of them had heard in days. The breakthrough in negotiations came from an unexpected source. Ayanna, the young Apache woman who had been with Cordelia during the attack. She had been quietly observing the white soldiers for 3 days, and she had noticed something significant. 3 of their men, she reported to the council, they watch our women with respect, not hunger. And 2 of them know some of our words. They have Apache blood in their families. This intelligence led to careful conversations that revealed a truth everyone had overlooked. The territorial conflict was not simply white against Apache, but a complex web of mixed families, competing interests, and individuals trying to survive. In a changing world, Corporal Martinez approached the Apache camp under a white flag on the 3rd day, speaking to Nalani in fluent Spanish peppered with Apache phrases his grandmother had taught him. "My colonel wishes to propose a solution," he said respectfully. "The woman Cordelia has chosen your ways freely, and her marriage is valid under territorial law. But the man Grimwald claims financial loss. He paid a bride price to her father and provided for her care. What does he want?" Nalani asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Compensation. If the Apache will pay what he invested in her, he will publicly release all claim and sign papers declaring her a free woman who chose her own path." The insult of treating Cordelia like a commodity to be bought and sold made Kesta's jaw clench with fury. But Nalani placed a restraining hand on his arm. "How much?" she asked pragmatically. $50 and 2 horses. The amount was significant. For the Apache, representing months of careful trading and resource management. But it was also achievable, and it would end the standoff without bloodshed. "We will discuss this," Nalani told Martinez. "Give us until dawn." That night, as the Apache Council debated the proposal, Cordelia sat apart from the group, watching the desert stretch endlessly toward the horizon. She was thinking about freedom and its price, about the strange mathematics of a life that could be valued in dollars and horses. Kestai found her there, bringing a blanket against the desert cold. "They'll pay it," she said without preamble. "Your people will pay for my freedom because it's the practical choice. But I want you to know whatever happens next, whatever our marriage becomes, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that sacrifice." "You already are," he said, settling beside her. "But now we have the chance to discover what we might become together, without guns pointed at us and desperate circumstances forcing our hands." As dawn approached and the final negotiations began, neither Cordelia nor Kestai knew that their marriage would become legendary throughout the territory, not just as the unlikely romance between a runaway bride and an Apache warrior, but as the beginning of a new understanding between 2 peoples learning that love could bridge any divide. 6 months after the canyon standoff, Cordelia knelt beside the cooking fire outside the wickiup she now shared with Kestai, grinding mesquite beans with the steady rhythm she had finally mastered. Her hands, once pale and soft, were now bronzed by the desert sun and calloused from Ha-Lin. Honest work. She wore a Apache dress, a buckskin skirt and blouse, decorated with turquoise beads that Ayana had given her as a wedding gift. The transformation went deeper than appearances. She thought in a mixture of English and Apache now, dreamed in the language of wind patterns and seasonal migrations, and felt the pull of the 4 sacred directions in her bones. Yet she remained unmistakably herself, curious, determined, and occasionally stubborn in ways that both frustrated and delighted her husband. "The traders from Santa Fe have arrived," Kestai announced, approaching with the easy stride she loved to watch. "They're asking specifically for the white woman who makes the healing salves." Cordelia smiled, wiping her hands on a strip of cloth. Her ability to read and write had proven invaluable to the Apache, allowing her to record traditional remedies and negotiate better prices with traders who respected education. Her integration of settler knowledge with Apache wisdom had created medicines that were in demand throughout the territory. "What do they offer in exchange?" silver for jewelry making, good steel for tools, and ... Kesta's expression grew cautious. News from your former settlement. Cordelia's hands stilled. In the months since her escape and marriage, she had deliberately avoided thinking about the life she had left behind. The Apache way was to live in the present, to let the past inform wisdom without chaining the spirit. But everyone had limits. Tell me, she said quietly. Your father has disowned you publicly, claiming you died of fever to preserve family honor. Barnabas Grimwald married the Hendricks girl 2 months ago. Kestai paused, studying her face. And there are rumors that other young women have begun questioning their arranged marriages, asking why they cannot choose their own paths. The news hit Cordelia like cold water, painful but ultimately cleansing. Her father's rejection hurt, but it also severed the last chains binding her to a life that had never fit. And the thought that her example might inspire other women to claim their own freedom filled her with fierce joy. Perhaps some good has come from our scandal, she said. More than you know? Kestai sat beside her, his shoulder warm against hers. The territorial governor wants to meet with us. Colonel Hayes has recommended that the Apache be given an official voice in regional decisions, and he suggested you as translator and cultural advisor. Cordelia stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. They want me to be a bridge between our peoples? Not just you? Us. Together. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the natural ease that had developed over months of shared life. We've proven that understanding between Apache and white settlers is possible. The government wants to explore what that might mean for the future of the territory. The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. It would mean regular contact with her old world, potential reconciliation with some of her past, and the chance to prevent the kind of bloodshed that had been threatening when they first met. But it would also mean exposure, scrutiny, and the risk that their fragile happiness might be destroyed by the very forces they sought to influence. What do you want? She asked. Kestai was quiet for a moment, gazing out at the desert that had shaped both their peoples in different ways. I want our children to grow up in a world where they don't have to choose between Apache and white, where they can be proud of all parts of their heritage. I want the courage we found in each other to inspire others to reach across the divisions that keep us at war. Children. They hadn't spoken directly about the possibility before, though Cordelia had been aware of the gentle speculation from the Apache women about when she might begin showing signs of pregnancy. The thought of raising children who belonged fully to neither world but could navigate both was both daunting and deeply appealing. And I want, Kestai continued, turning to face her with an intensity that still made her heart skip, to build something lasting with you. Not just survival or convenience, but real partnership. Love that grows stronger with each season. The word love had been carefully avoided in their conversations until now. Their marriage had begun as necessity and evolved into deep affection and respect, but neither had dared name what was growing between them, as if speaking it aloud might break the spell. Is that what this is? Cordelia asked softly. Love? What would you call it when someone becomes the first person you think of upon waking and the last before sleep? When their happiness matters more than your own comfort? When you cannot imagine a future that doesn't include their laughter? Cordelia felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness but from overwhelming gratitude. I would call it a miracle, she whispered, and yes, I would call it love. As the sun set over their desert home, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they held each other and planned for a future that would honor both their peoples while forging something entirely new. Neither knew that their descendants would one day speak of them as the couple who proved love could overcome any barrier, whose courage had helped heal a wounded land, but they could feel the significance of what they were building together. One conversation and one choice at a time. 3 years later. Cordelia stood on the steps of the Territorial Capitol building in Phoenix, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her pregnant belly while her 2-year-old son played at her feet. Little Joaquin was a perfect blend of both his parents' Kesta's dark hair and alert eyes combined with Cordelia's stubborn chin and infectious laugh. He chattered happily in a mixture of Apache, English, and Spanish, unconsciously embodying the multicultural future his parents envisioned. "Are you ready for this?" Castai asked, adjusting his formal shirt one final time. He looked uncomfortable in the white man's clothing required for the territorial assembly, but his bearing remained that of a warrior and leader. "Are we ever ready for history?" Cordelia replied, smoothing her own dress, a carefully chosen compromise between Apache and settler styles that she hoped would signal her role as bridge between worlds. Today they would address the territorial legislature about the proposed Apache Cultural Preservation and Settlement Agreement, a groundbreaking treaty that would establish permanent reservations with guaranteed rights for traditional practices, while also creating mechanisms for peaceful coexistence and trade. It was the culmination of 3 years of delicate negotiations, and its success or failure would determine whether the Arizona Territory would be remembered for genocide or genuine partnership. The Assembly Hall was packed beyond capacity, with settlers, Apache representatives, territorial officials, and journalists from as far away as San Francisco. Cordelia could see faces she recognized: Colonel Hayes, now promoted to general and serving as territorial military advisor; Ayanna, now married to Corporal Martinez and representing the growing number of mixed heritage families; even Barnabas Grimwald, whose own marriage had proven as miserable as Cordelia had predicted and who now watched her success with barely concealed envy. When Governor Mitchell called them forward, Cordelia and Kestai walked to the podium together, their son toddling between them. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present here. It was a family that represented what the territory could become. Kestai spoke first, his English now flawless but retaining the cadences and dignity of his Apache heritage. He talked about land, not as property but as sacred trust, about warfare not as glory but as last resort, about the Apache desire not to destroy the newcomers but to coexist with them in ways that honored both people's deepest values. Then it was Cordelia's turn. She had spent weeks preparing her remarks, but now, looking out at the sea of faces, some hopeful, some skeptical, some openly hostile, she set aside her written speech and spoke from the heart. 3 years ago, I was a frightened girl running from a life that offered no choices, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed hall. I thought freedom meant escape, but I learned it means the right to build something better. My husband and I didn't plan to become symbols of anything larger than our own happiness. But we've discovered that love, real love, cannot exist in isolation. It must serve something beyond itself. She gestured to the mixed crowd before her. In this room, we have Apache and Mexican, settler and soldier, people whose grandparents were enemies and whose grandchildren might be friends. The question is not whether we can live in the same territory. We already do. The question is whether we can live as neighbors instead of adversaries. She spoke of the practical benefits of cooperation, the Apache knowledge of desert survival that had saved countless settler families, the trade relationships that had brought prosperity to both communities, the mixed marriages that had created children who belonged fully to the American future. But she also spoke of something deeper, the transformation that occurred when people saw each other as fully human. When I first came to the Apache people, I was afraid because I had been taught to see them as savage, she continued. But savagery is not about race or culture, it's about the choice to dehumanize others. I found more civilization in an Apache camp than I ever did in drawing rooms where women were treated as property and differences were resolved through violence. A murmur ran through the crowd at this direct challenge to settler assumptions about superiority and civilization. But Cordelia pressed on. The treaty before you is not perfect, and it will require compromise from everyone. Apache people will have to accept boundaries they never recognized before. Settlers will have to acknowledge rights they never thought to grant. Both sides will have to trust in the possibility that former enemies can become partners. She paused, her hand finding Kesta's, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. But I stand before you as proof that such transformation is possible. 3 years ago, my husband was everything I had been taught to fear. Today, he is my closest friend, my strongest supporter, and the father of children who represent the best of both worlds. If a runaway bride and an Apache warrior can build a love that makes both of them stronger, imagine what our communities might accomplish together. When she finished speaking, the silence stretched long enough to make her wonder if she had gone too far. Then General Hayes began to applaud, slowly at first, then with gathering enthusiasm. Others joined in tentatively at first, then with growing conviction. The vote, when it came, was closer than anyone had hoped, but more decisive than many had feared. The Apache Cultural Preservation and Settlement Agreement passed by a margin of 7 votes, making Arizona Territory the first in the American West to formally recognize indigenous sovereignty while establishing peaceful coexistence frameworks. That evening, as they celebrated with friends,